Hi everyone, it's Nicole Spohr for Simon Says Stamp, and today I'm sharing some outline inlay cards with some Simon Says Stamp dies. I had created the card in the center, the cross card, with a die from a recent release. And I noticed that with the most recent release and then a previously released, there were lots of dies that were similar. And I thought it would be really fun to show several examples of how to use those dies to create some beautiful inlay cards. So I have three completely different cards, three different colorways with my cards using this same technique today. For our first card, since Easter is coming this weekend, I did want to share this cross Easter themed card, starting by using the My Favorite Things Radiating Rays stencil on some smooth white cardstock. I'm applying Lawn Fawn Lemonade and Butter inks to this for a very soft background. I really loved the idea of having these radiating rays coming out from behind the cross design. This cross that we will be using is called the Outline, I want to say the exact thing, of course, Outline Floral cross. And I'm going to be die cutting all of these outline floral dies today from smooth white cardstock and stacking them on one on top of another 3 times to give that dimension. And then I have an inlay with colorful cardstock in the design itself. So I'll be sharing that as we go along. Finish adding my ink here. And then we are going to remove our stencil. And I have die cut the outline floral cross from smooth white cardstock, and we need to glue that to the center of our panel here. And I'm going to use a liquid glue. I really love the Lawn Fawn glue tube, and that's what I'm going to be using today. With intricate dies like this, oftentimes the little pieces inside will stick. I love the Spellbinders Tool-in-One for removing those, whether you remove them with the piercing end or you can use the roller to roll out those little pieces. Either way works. What I find is the easiest with this inlay is to put your outline down first and then do your inlay and then finally add the additional 2 layers for the frame last. The inlay just works a lot easier this way. I have die cut this outline floral cross from smooth white cardstock, and then we're using a beautiful, this is the Hero Hues Paradise cardstock. The greenery is all Hero Hues Kiwi cardstock. And then several colors for florals. Now you could keep all these additional pieces and create other cards with them. I did not today. I just didn't want to, I guess, go through the extra effort to do that, but you totally could. Maybe not quite as much with this particular design, but the next 2 cards, I think it definitely could, especially for flowers and things, because there's quite a few extra pieces. I really found it easiest to try to work in certain areas at a time. With this card, I had done this design several weeks ago while at a crafting retreat, and so I'm simply recreating it for the video today. I had a guide to follow along with, basically. So I started by just adding all the greenery first, adding a little liquid glue to each area that I'm inlaying. I'm using a crystal katana to pick things up and put it where it goes. And then I would move on to the next color. In this case, we're going to use Hero Hues Amethyst cardstock for some of the little flower areas. And I'm going to add the liquid glue. And then I'm going to take the crystal katana and pick up those little circles and pop them in place. A jewel picker, crystal katana, something of that nature is really going to be helpful. I find that I use it every time I sit down to craft and make a card, but especially with small pieces or inlay, a crystal katana jewel picker is invaluable for keeping your fingers out of the glue, especially with teeny tiny areas. Now, I would only put glue in the area that I'm adding the inlay to. So anything that was purple, I did add glue to that and then add my inlay, and then I moved on to the next area. So we have our next color. This is the Hero Hues Papaya cardstock. And we'll start adding all of those pieces. Little dabs of glue, and then simply filling in those wells with the color. As I get more of the inlay in place, I think it really starts to take shape and you can see the beauty of the design. I love inlay. It's a simple technique. It is a little time consuming. However, I think it's just very rewarding because you end up with these beautiful, intricate, multi-color die-cut pieces. This cross is definitely one of my favorites. I think it's a super beautiful card, especially for Easter, especially with the sentiment I'm choosing to use here today. You could use any faith-themed sentiment to go with this and maybe simply change up the colors for another occasion. After I have all my inlay done, I'm going to die cut this Outline Floral cross 2 more times from smooth white cardstock, add liquid glue to the back, and stack these one on top of another to finish off the outline design in the center of my card. This gives the outline a little bit more of a substantial look and really draws your eye in. This is a simple way to give that outline more dimension. I like to use an acrylic block on top of a design that has this much liquid adhesive on it to help hold it flat, to help squish that down in place, and to really seal those layers together. Acrylic blocks are nice and heavy, and they work especially well with this kind of technique. But you could use anything, heavy books or magazines or something like that. The acrylic blocks are nice because if a little glue comes out, it's not going to leave some book or newspaper residue, or not newspaper, magazine residue on your card. I'm going to adhere this entire panel now to a top fold card base. You could add an additional stamped sentiment inside your card if you wanted. I wanted to add a Easter sentiment. I am using Christ is Risen from the Tiny Words Faith stamp set, but I really was aware of the color of ink I was using for this card. This is pastels, this is light, it's springy, it's Easter. I didn't want to use black. I didn't really want to use something like yellow that was going to fade into the background. And I didn't really want to pull one of the colors from the cross out into this, although I could have. I just couldn't settle on a certain color. So what I opted for instead was gray. We're using Simon Says Stamp Smoke Ink and stamping our sentiment down there below. And the gray fades to this nice soft gray. It's not a harsh black. And it really works beautifully for a pastel design like this. The final thing I'm going to do for my card is add some additional embellishment. I'm using Nuvo Crystal Drops in Dandelion Yellow outside of the cross. So kind of in those radiating rays, we're adding some additional little droplets throughout the design. And then in the center of the florals, we'll use the translucent yellow color to add some droplets to those centers. And that's going to include like our orange and pink larger flowers, as well as the yellow and purple smaller flowers. And we're just going to add those little droplets to the center to finish it off. If you don't have Nuvo crystal drops or you want to use something that doesn't take as long to dry, gemstones, sequins, something small like that would work beautifully. Our next card is going to feature completely different colors, and we're going to be using the Outline Floral frame. Very similar design, but this frame is actually A2 sized, and it is going to work beautifully to frame up sentiments in the center of the card. So I've die cut the frame, and I also am using some stamps and dies that I want to use for my sentiment, which is what we're going to be framing up for this design. And we're going to start by stamping our sentiments in the center of this Hero Hues Nautical, this is Lawn Fawn Blue Jay cardstock. And I am stamping the sentiments from the Tiny Words Encouragement stamp set from Simon Says Stamp with clear embossing ink, heat embossing with white embossing powder, and then you can see I used the powder tool, and that's really made this dark cardstock. It's going to stay put. Use a Swiffer dry cloth or another dry cloth or paper towel to remove that powder residue. That's why I stamped and embossed this first, so I could easily remove any of that residue. And then we're going to glue down our frame over this background. And I am doing this inside of the Misty because it makes lining up my background die cut, this frame, with my background so simple. I am putting some acrylic blocks on top to help hold that flat. And then just like our floral cross, or our outline floral cross, I am going to start with the leaves. But this time I opted to do two-tone leaves with the Hero Hues Pesto and Palm cardstocks. There's a lot more inlay on this particular design, and I thought that the two-tone leaves would really be pretty. I'm also limiting the number of colors I'm using for the florals around this design. So I thought the addition of another color of green would work well. You'll also notice that instead of the limey green that I used for the first card with all the springy colors, this card is going to be geared more towards lilacs and cornflower blues. So I used a little bit deeper, richer greens with the pesto and palm colors. Just like before, I'll add glue to a few sections at a time and then add in or inlay my leaves. And I'm working my way around the frame. I found that this made it go so much quicker, and it was much easier to have my two panels right next to my background while I was working. The larger images I often will adhere with my fingers. Smaller, I almost always use the crystal katana. The leaves are pretty easy to apply with your fingers though. So we almost have all of our leaves inlaid around the frame. It's time to start adding some flowers. As I mentioned, I'm keeping the colors to lilacs and cornflower blues. In fact, this first cardstock color I'm using is the Lawn Fawn Moonstone cardstock. And to make this easy, I am replicating what I do on one side on the other side. You'll notice that the design on the left side of the frame is flipped onto the right. So it's just kind of flipped, but it's identical. So the four flowers in the corner are all going to be this Lawn Fawn Moonstone cardstock. Next, I'm going to take some Simon Says Stamp lavender cardstock, and again, all these little flowers, the two on the left and the two on the right, are going to have this beautiful lavender, as well as the teeny little circle shapes. It was really easy to lay over my background and then simply pop those little circles into the areas. I added the glue, layered this right over the top, and then just pushed those through. And then I'll just make sure they're lined up perfectly. Finally, I am using some Simon Says, or yes, I think so. Simon Says Stamp cornflower, yes, cardstock. And that was for the other flowers. And then I'm going to go back with Moonstone and fill in some of these circles and things, and I'll fill in some of the other ones with additional colors of cardstock. So here's more cornflower. So keeping it all with those cornflower blues and lilac colors. In between our two stamped and embossed phrases, I want to add a die cut sentiment. First, I guess we'll go ahead and adhere our two frames on top of this, just like we did before. We want to add a little dimension. If you don't want to add the dimension and you simply want the simple inlay, you could definitely forego adding this step. I like the little bit of added dimension over the top to help really frame up the inlay design. After each addition of the frame, and you want to, with this especially, it's a large surface area, kind of work slowly and make sure all of the little areas are lining up perfectly. After each frame addition, go ahead and put your acrylic blocks on top to help hold that down while the glue is drying. I die cut the Simon Says Stamp I Adore You sentiment from some orchid glitter Simon Says Stamp cardstock. I originally was going to adhere it directly to the panel, but decided I felt like it needed a little bit of dimension as well. So I die cut it again from smooth white cardstock, and I'm mounting the glittery sentiment onto this white die cut sentiment. Tweezers help hold on to the layer since these are very small and delicate while I'm adding the glue, and then I'm just popping on that glitter layer on top. Once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and adhere this to my card, but I want to make sure that I have the spacing correct first. So I lay it out, and then I'm going to kind of start here at the bottom with the Y for the word you, and then adhere my sentiment. This design would work for many different occasions. You could switch up the sentiments used, and it could work for almost anything. I love card designs that can be used over and over again, simply by changing out one element. This time, instead of using yellows for the center of my flowers, I am going to take some bottle green Nuvo crystal drops, which is one of my very favorite colors, and it also has the added benefit today that it matches the green cardstock colors I used, and we are going to fill in the center of the flowers with this bottle green Nuvo crystal drops. Not only the flowers that have the white center from the inlay, but also the little lavender flowers as well. For this card, I did take some additional little embellishments. These are Honeybee Stamps white little hearts, and I am going to glue 3 of these down, one at the bottom of my sentiments in the center, one at the top, and one at the tail end of the U in the word you. I'm using my crystal katana to pick those up and pop them down in place, adding little dabs of glue with the Lawn Fawn glue tube. And that will finish the second card design with the Outline Floral frame. Finally, from the Blossoms and Butterflies brand new release from Simon Says Stamp, we're going to create a Mother's Day card with the Outline Floral Mom. This die really, I was going to use the other 2 in a card, but the minute I got this one in the mail, I knew I wanted to do a video with 3 since the design is so similar. I am going to start with another new product from Simon Says Stamp Blossoms and Butterflies release, and that's the Mesh Stencil. And I'm applying this ink around the edges of a smooth white cardstock panel with the ink blending brushes. These are the Picket Fence Life Changing Blending Brush, and I'm applying that all the way around the edges. Again, I chose the olive ink. We're going to go back to the Pesto and Palm Hero Hues cardstock colors for the leaves on this card, and they match this olive ink from Simon Says Stamp perfectly. I love this Outline Mom floral die. So much fun. Just as we have done for the previous two cards, we are going to draw or kind of add some liquid glue to the back of our frame and pop this and center it in the center of the design. Now, if I had been thinking, I would have inked the entire panel, not just the edges. I kind of was forgetting that the center of the letter O has a cutout in it. I was thinking it was more of a solid design like the cross, I guess. And so just FYI, if you're going to do something similar and stencil a background for this particular die or something that has a cutout letter in the center, I would really recommend just stenciling the whole thing. I was trying to save myself a little time, a little ink, but I really kind of wish that you could see the stenciling in the center when I'm all finished. It didn't bother me enough to redo it, but I did want to mention it here. As I did with the previous Outline Floral frame, I am going to use the two-tone leaves all the way around. By starting with the leaves, it really just fills in a ton of the inlay, and then you're left with the flowers, which I think the flowers are kind of minimal on this design. There's a lot of leaves and greenery, and then there are those little pops of color. We're going to have that additional pop of color with the letters. So very much like the Outline Floral cross at the beginning, we're going to have a big surface area of color. The cross was all the Paradise Hero Hues cardstock color. Now we're going to use Hero Hues Plum cardstock to fill in the letters for Mom. And I just drawing my glue in and popping those in place. Now there is the little outline center for the O. I will come back to that here in just a second because we definitely want to add that. It finishes off the design nicely. Anything else that we're going to add the plum cardstock to, let's go ahead and do that at the same time. In this case, I kept it minimal since there's so much area of plum in the word mom. So the little circles, there's two groups of those at the top and one at the bottom. And those are all going to be plum. And then we're going to pull two pinky kind of colors for the additional two florals in this. And any little circles left over. And I kind of just call those flower buds. And I had chosen all the cardstock colors ahead of time. I went through all my cardstock and mixed and matched brands, whatever I felt looked good together. Plum was chosen first because I knew I wanted something that worked with my Pesto and Palm Hero Hues cardstocks. This pink cardstock is Lawn Fawn Pencil Eraser, and I absolutely love it with the Hero Hues Plum cardstock. I think it's a beautiful, it just complements it so nicely. And then from there, I really needed a third color. And I ended up going with Lawn Fawn Raspberry, which is going to pull in a little bit more pink, but still works really nicely with the rest of the colors on this card. And that is it. I've got my three kind of pinks and purples. I've got my two greens, and then our stenciled background and the white outline, of course. We're going to fill in any additional little bud areas. This is going to give us a few extra pops of color. And then we can embellish this just like we did before. And I also see it looks like I'm maybe missing a few leaves, which I need to grab in that Pesto cardstock. I went through and did all the palm leaves, And now we need to go in and add the pesto ones for that two-tone look. This card in particular, you could make multiples of, at least 2, just by switching the green leaf colors. So wherever I used palm on this one, you could use pesto on the other one and vice versa. And then switch up your colors for the word mom and the florals, and you could easily create 2 Mother's Day cards very, very quickly. I'm going to use that same bottle green Nuvo crystal drops for the center of the flowers on this design. I'm also adding in the center outline for the word mom out of white cardstock. We want to make sure that that also has 3 layers, just like everything else we've done. By adding that additional frame, it just helps make the frame prominent and really stand out, I think. Just like we used the Tiny Words Encouragement stamp set for the Outline Floral frame card, we are going to use the You Are Special to Me sentiment from the Tiny Words Encouragement for this card here, just to add a little additional sentiment to this design. We'll be stamping that phrase on some of the Hero Hues Palm cardstock using a clear embossing ink and heat embossing with white embossing powder before trimming it into a thin strip. We will adhere it to our card with some foam adhesive, layering it over part of the design. I played around with where I wanted to put it exactly. You could put it right in the center. You could layer it, kind of at the bottom over part of the florals. I tried to not cover up too much of the floral because that's where we're getting all of our additional color. So it's kind of just right there over the bottom edge of the word and then over the top edge of our floral frame. And I want to get it centered as much as possible. You can see what it would look like if I moved it. I couldn't decide, so I did move it and play around with it just a little bit. Now that we have that, let's finish up with our embellishing. The bottle green Nuvo crystal drops will be used in the center of all of the florals. Remember, you could definitely use rhinestones or sequins or other small embellishments instead. And then to add a little extra sparkle to this particular card design, we're going to be covering up the light pink flower inlays with some Nuvo crystal drops in white blizzard. This is going to give a sparkly, iridescent kind of look over those areas. This is also one of those ways, if you wanted to use glossy accents, it kind of gives you a stained glass look when you do an inlay like this. So if you would cover any of the sections with glossy accents, you could get a stained glass kind of effect, which I also think is super, super pretty. If your Nuvo crystal drops kind of have a funny little tip at the end, I call it the little Hershey kiss, you can always tap the bottom of your paper, lift it up and tap the bottom of your paper. You probably saw me do that a second ago, and it will kind of help even out the product. Another tip is I often will kind of squirt a little bit out on a scrap piece of paper just to make sure that it's flowing before I take it to my project so that it hopefully doesn't have air bubbles that explode onto my project and ruin the card. We will adhere this to a white side fold card base. And I'm just fixing, it looks like I have a crystal drop that had that Hershey Kiss top on it that wasn't working with tapping on the bottom. And there I finished it off. And look at all of that great dimension with the 3 layers in the inlay. So here is our Mother's Day card with the Outline Floral Mom, the Outline Floral Cross Easter design, and the Outline Floral Frame I Adore You card. Thank you guys so much for joining me for these inlay style cards featuring outline floral dies. The supplies I used to create these cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says stamps and dies that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.